Hey everyone, my name is Herman Singh. I'm joined with Manvir Singh today. This episode is going to be on the history, importance, and the timeline of the Akal Takht. It's going to be done in a historical standpoint, so we're not going to be giving our opinions and views from a religious perspective.
Yeah, we're not trying to start up any controversy.
Exactly. And we thought this would be a cool episode because there's a lot of history that most of us don't know about the Akal Takht. And also, just another disclaimer, apologies in advance for any mistake we may make. But yeah, I'm getting into it. I was doing some research to try to, fill in the gaps of any knowledge I didn't have. And I came across this amazing article. It's written by Gurbir Singh, a religious studies PhD candidate at the University of California, Riverside. And the article is titled, "The Institution of the Akal Takht, the Transformation of Authority in Sikh History." We'll definitely link the article in the description. I reached out to him, asked for permission to, cite it or use it as a guide on this episode. And I really encourage everybody, if you do like this episode, to go read that article after. It's very thorough and it goes into depth on a lot of interesting stuff. So just right off the bat, Manvir, what do you know of the Akal Takht? Why? Where is it? What is it?
The Akal Takht is located in the Harmandir Sahib complex, and I believe it's mainly to discuss Sikh issues or issues for the Sikh community.
Yeah, and do you know who built it? Who started it?
I believe it was Guru Hargobind Ji.
Yeah, exactly. So Guru Hargobind Ji is the sixth Guru of the Sikhs, and his father Guru Arjan Dev Ji was a Shaheed. He was killed by Jahangir, the king of the Mughals at the time. And that kind of ushered in this, watershed moment, if you will, where Sikhs up until that point had been not as militant. And Guru Hargobind Ji realizes that, hey, not only are we spiritual, we are warriors. And we got to, take up arms and rule as a kingdom almost. And then that's why he built this Akal Takht. Do you know what Akal means or Akal Takht means?
Akal means entirety, no?
Yeah, or kind of like Vaheguru, or I think it directly translates to the timeless one or the immortal one. So Akal Takht means throne. So the Akal Takht is the throne of Vaheguru, the throne of God, the throne of this, Akal. And so Guru Hargobind Ji makes this, and that's going to be from where he is the sovereign leader, where he rules from, where he holds his king's court, if you will. And he builds it directly across from the Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple. And then, are you familiar with Midi and Piri?
A little bit. Midi Piri was symbolizing spiritual power is as important as being a warrior, I believe.
Yeah, kind of. So Piri is spiritual power. And then Midi, actually, that's always translated into temporal power. Do you know what that means? Or
explain more. Temporal,
physical
power?
Yeah, kind of like sovereign power, the worldly power, right? It's kind of almost used always in contrast with the word spiritual. So Piri is Guru Hargobind Ji had two swords. One was Midi, one was Piri. One gave him, he was the religious leader of the Sikhs. He was the spiritual leader. And Piri, that was Piri. And then Midi was, he is the sovereign leader. He's, almost ruling like a king. Mm-hmm. So actually, have you ever seen the two Nishan Sahibs in the Harmandir? Yeah, so one of them represents Midi, that is on the Akal Takht side, and Piri is on the Harmandir side. Did you know that they're actually of different heights?
I didn't.
Yeah, so the Piri one, the one on the Harmandir Sahib side, the Golden Temple side, that one is actually 2 inches taller than Midi. And
the one representing spiritual power.
Exactly. So it's kind of this idea that, both are important, but, spiritual is more important, God is more important, Vaheguru is more important. And the Akal Takht itself is actually built at a 22-degree angle to the left of the Harmandir Sahib. And the importance of that is quite profound. When you are sitting inside of the Akal Takht and you look out, you always see the Harmandir Sahib. But when you are sitting at the Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple, and you look out, you do not see the Akal Takht. And that's very important because it's showing that when you are taking course or actions of this world, when you're the king ruling, you must always look to God and religion and spirituality as your guide. But when you're, making decisions, or when you're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, you do not take this world into account.
I see.
Yeah, and that's really, profound when you think about it, and we can show a picture of that too. But that's kind of why Guru Hargobind Ji makes the Akal Takht. That's where he's going to rule from, and that's kind of some of the reasoning behind it. He also decides to make it the throne 12 feet high, and that was just a direct challenge to the Mughal rulers at the time, where only the king was allowed to sit that high. So Guru Hargobind Ji is like, hey, I'm here, and this is my throne, and this is how high I'm going to sit. And right away, Guru Hargobind Ji is arrested by Jahangir. He's arrested for not only, using the Akal Takht as a darbar, as like a court, but also for wearing royal attire. And that's another famous story, the Bandi Chor Divas, and how he's released is a very famous story. But for our side, he gives control to Bhai Gurdas Ji. Bhai Gurdas Ji is then kind of like, he's not given the title then, but for all intents and purposes, he is the Jathedar, caretaker, Jathedar of the Akal Takht. And the interesting thing is, he doesn't have the same power, because Guru Hargobind Ji is alive and just happens to be in jail at the time. So Bhai Gurdas Ji does not have any significant power, but he's like the caretaker, if you will. And then Guru Hargobind Ji is released, and he, stays at the Akal Takht for about 18 years. And he rules the Sikh empire, if you will. It's not exactly an empire at the time, but he rules the Sikh nation. And he then has to leave for battles. He kind of goes on this, war campaign, if you will, and with the Mughals, and he doesn't come back. So a little while later, the Akal Takht is taken by Priti Chand. Are you familiar with Priti Chand? Or?
Not really.
So I believe, and I may be wrong, but I believe he was the Guru Arjan Dev Ji's older brother. He's definitely a relative in the family, and he's almost like this jealous older brother that believes he should have been made the Guru. And he also does have a not a big following, but he does have a following, and they're kind of like, it's like a Sikh sect, if you will. And his group is going to take control, and they're going to stay in control for well into the 18th century, the 1700s. And that also brings up some very interesting facts. It also means that it's very likely that the 7th Guru, Guru Haraya Ji, and the 8th Guru, Guru Harkrishan Ji, never actually visited Amritsar, the complex itself. They never went to Harmandir Sahib and the Akal Takht. And then Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji has a very famous story. You're familiar with it, or?
No.
So Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji in 1669 went to the Akal Takht, but he was stopped by Priti Chand's followers, and he doesn't decide to fight them or anything like that. He says okay, and he does, however, rest right outside the Akal Takht, and that's somewhat significant. It kind of shows that Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji also knew the importance of this Takht, right? And today there's a Gurdwara there, Gurdwara, I believe, Tara Sahib. And another very important thing to realize is that the Akal Takht at that time does not have any authority amongst mainstream Sikhs, right? The mainstream Sikhs at that time look to Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. They do not look to the Akal Takht, right? And that also means it's very likely that Guru Gobind Singh Ji never went to the Akal Takht either, right? He starts, at Vaisakhi, he does it at Anandapur.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a really important history. So kind of Guru Hargobind Ji created it, ruled from there. He leaves, and the living Sikh Gurus never actually rule from there after him. And then it's around 1721. The Khalsa armies are kind of strong, and there's two big factions in Amritsar at the time. The Bandi Khalsa and the Tat Khalsa, and there kind of is this dispute, and both of them kind of claim authority over Harmandir Sahib and the Akal Takht. And Mata Sundari, Guru Gobind Singh Ji's wife, she sends Bhai Mani Singh, the very famous Sikh scholar. he kind of becomes like this custodian, almost like a jathedar of the Akal Takht. And he goes there and he settles the dispute. He actually takes the Takht Khalsa side. And he kind of starts this Sarbat Khalsas. Have you heard of that?
Vaguely familiar. Sarbat Khalsa translates to, I think, like the entirety of the Sikh nation.
Yeah, exactly. So Sarbat, like everybody, Khalsa, meaning, the Khalsa. So Sarbat Khalsa means the entirety of the Khalsa is going to gather, and he decides, we're going to gather at the Akal Takht, and we're going to make decisions on behalf of the community, decisions that pertain to, some Sikh issue. And yeah.
Yeah. So how often would they meet? Like, would it meet for special occasions, or was it times hardship or conflict?
Yeah, so by Mani Singh, the way he does it is he has them meet twice a year. So every Vaisakhi and every Diwali of every year, there's going to be Sarbat Khalsa, and they're going to talk and discuss and make decisions on behalf of the whole community. Later on, it's going to be kind of on a problem basis. When there's a big enough issue, we're going to meet. And
hardship
Yeah, and there was arguably a Sarbat Khalsa in 2015. It didn't take place at the actual Akal Takht, but we can talk about that a little later too. But after that, in 1757, Ahmad Shah Amdali raids Amritsar, and his forces actually tear down the Harmandir Sahib. They tear down the Akal Takht. And that's actually when you see these famous, you've seen all the Baba Deep Singhs. And what's he famous for, do you know?
It was for going to the rescue of trying to aid and stopping the destruction of Harmandir Sahib and the Akal Takht, right?
Yeah, and then but you've seen that very famous picture of his, right? He kind of has his like hand on his neck, or some have his head in his hand.
Yeah,
almost,
in battle, and he was injured.
Yeah, exactly. So but that was Baba Deep Singh led an army towards Amritsar, and Baba Deep Singh Ji, does pass away. However, they do eventually rebuild Harmandir Sahib, and they take the Akal Takht back. And then later on, we kind of enter the Missal era. So the Sikh Missals were kind of like these regional armies or groups run by this quote-unquote Missal, and they controlled a certain area of Punjab. And there was also a lot of inner Missal fighting. So it's kind of Sikh versus Sikhs. But during this time, there were still Sarbat Khalsas happening at the Akal Takht, but there wasn't all the Khalsa, wasn't all the individuals. It would just be the leaders of every Missal would go there, and they would discuss it, and they would also, kind of discuss more spiritual issues.
So not really political issues.
Yeah, they wouldn't, because they're kind of different political factions, fighting each other. So they're not always discussing political issues, but more, Sikh issues. And then a little while later on in 1800, Nihang Singh, Akali Fulla Singh, he comes with an army of 2,000 Nihangs, and they take the Akal Takht. And he himself, Fulla Singh, was very charismatic guy. He was a really good leader, and he had a pretty big following. And he very famously punished Maharaja Ranjit Singh. According to Garbir's article, he punished him because he married a Muslim woman. So here it is, the Akal Takht, right? The quote unquote temporal head of the Sikhs is punishing Maharaja Ranjit Singh, right? The emperor or the king of all the Punjab, right? So that's pretty profound if you think about that for a second, right? The leader of the Akal Takht is allowed
punishing the emperor.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then after, he's a pretty charismatic leader, Fulla Singh, and when he does pass away, the Udasis take control of the Akal Takht. And so the Udasis are kind of like this sect that was started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji's son. They're, I guess, under the Sikh umbrella. I think they're definitely considered a Sikh sect, but they do have a lot of practices that are outside of mainstream Sikhi. And it is, reported that it was Maharaja Ranjit Singh himself that kind of gave the Udasis control of the Harmandir Sahib and the Akal Takht. And one interesting thing they do is they kind of put in a painting of Guru Har Gobind Ji that they, are doing worship or puja to.
Really? At that time when they come into power.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, that's not within the norm of mainstream, Sikhs or, the Khalsa tradition. And then after them is the British. Do you know
Here
what
come
happened?
the British.
Exactly, right. And so what do you think the British did?
Take over like they always do.
Exactly. So Britain takes over, and they kind of appoint their own caretaker. The caretaker did formally have the title of Jatidar, I believe.
But it was mainly symbolic, right?
No, I mean they're also kind of like a mouthpiece for the British, right? So they're kind of just saying whatever the British want, and they're also just doing what they're told, right? And then during that time, we also have the Singh Sabha movement. So along with the British came a lot of kind of like Christians.
Oh, yeah.
And during this time, if you kind of look at religion in North India, even today, if you go to any Gurdwara, in India at least, you'll see a lot of non-Sikhs at the Gurdwara. And during this time, it kind of was both ways. You'll see a lot of Sikhs at Mandirs also, right? So the Singh Sabha movement was kind of this Sikh movement that starts in the late 1800s to kind of react to all these Christians coming in trying to convert people, and B, to also make sure that all Sikh Gurdwaras institutions are run by Sikhs and doing what's good for Sikhs and the Sikh Panth, and also for just everybody to kind of know what it means to be a Sikh. Sikhs aren't supposed to, according to them, do puja, right? Of a painting and things like that.
To kind of clean up the lines.
Yeah, so they're kind of, exactly. They're kind of cleaning up and kind of, crystallizing, if you will, the religion, kind of making sure that everybody knows that, wait, this is what Sikhs do. These guys doing puja of Guru Har Gobind Ji at the Akal Takht, that's not part of our Qawm, right? And right away, the Akal Takht, responds and they ban these guys, right? They ban the Singh Sabha movement leaders. And it's quite interesting because during this time, you have... it's very apparent that the Sikh Qawm, the Khalsa Panth, does not really look to the leaders of the Akal Takht for any authority, right? They don't really view them as an authority figure. They're kind of openly saying that some of the things you're doing are wrong. And the big moment during this time is the Jallianwala Bagh that happens, I believe, in 1919.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, Jallianwala Bagh, we've talked about it in other podcasts, but it was during kind of a very volatile time in India and in Punjab, where you have a lot of protests happening. You have the British kind of clamping down on them, clamping down on freedom of speech and things like that. So there's this big protest happening in Jallianwala Bagh. It's a place right by Amritsar, right by Harmandir Sahib, and they're protesting their right to speak and to say what they want. And the army's there, and General Dyer decides to tell the army to start shooting at all the protesters. And I believe over 400 people were killed.
It was a complete massacre.
Yeah. It was it's also known as the Amritsar massacre. It was a massacre. Kids and women, everybody are being killed.
Very, very big moment in the Indian revolutionary timeline.
Yeah, it's very big in the independence movement, and that was a really big point. And along with that, the British decide, and it's probably the biggest blunder in our story here, they decide to use the Jathedar of the Akal Takht as a mouthpiece and kind of as like this figure, and give Amrit and a Sropa to General Dyer.
That is wild.
Did you heard about this?
I've never heard of that, but that's like just this like tainted olive branch that they're handing out to like...
Yeah, and it it's also offensive. Here's the guy that literally killed hundreds and hundreds of Sikhs ruthlessly right outside the Harmandir Sahib, right outside the Akal Takht, and here you are giving him Amrit.
Yeah, thinking they're gonna mellow it over.
And very famously, and the conversation itself is recorded, the Jathedar at the time was Gyani Arur Singh, a mouthpiece of the British, and he tells him, hey, if you take Amrit, you got to keep your hair. And he says, I'm not going to keep my hair. I'm in the army. I can't keep my hair. He says, okay, fine. You don't have to keep your hair. He's like, but you are going to have to give up your smoking. He smoked a lot of cigarettes. And General Dyer is like, well, I promise you I'll smoke one less cigarette a year.
Man.
And I mean, that's the actual recording.
Joke. It's a complete joke.
And it was like a mockery of, something that, we hold as very sacred. And that happens. And then that's kind of this watershed moment where the Khalsa is like, wait a second, you guys doing puja inside the Akal Takht, we're not going to storm the complex for that. But you guys giving a saropa and then giving amrit to, the butcher of the Amritsar massacre, like that's a pretty big moment, right? And on top of that, any guess on who Gyani Arur Singh is currently related to? There's a prominent politician in Punjab who's his actual grandson.
No.
It's you ready for this? Simranjeet Singh Mann.
He's related to him.
It's his that's so Simranjeet Singh Mann, his nana, his maternal grandfather, is actually Gyani Arur Singh, the one that gave Amrit.
What a plot twist.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Exactly. And for those of you that don't know, Simranjeet Singh Mann is a very vocal, very outspoken member of parliament in India today. We talked about him in the Deep Sidhu episode. And he's fighting for Khalistan, right? He's a very vocal proponent of Khalistan, and he says, I want to do it within the framework of India's constitution, and that's like, this arguably an extremist perspective. And then here we have his actual nana, his grandpa, giving Amrit.
That's wild because they're like on two complete different sides of the spectrum.
Honestly, the most extreme on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And what, I'm not gonna say that he's has to bear the fault of his grandpa or anything like that. Right. But it's just also quite interesting that 100 years ago, it was still the same family that had some power and authority in Punjab, right?
Yeah, it's a fun fact. I mean, you can, to each their own, you can make of it what you want, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's kind of this idea. I mean, if you look at, I don't want to get too political right now, but if you look at a lot of Indian politicians, their fathers were leaders, their grandfathers were leaders, and that's something that's quite interesting to look at from especially an outside perspective. But getting back to the story, after that happens in 1920, the Khalsa kind of storms the Akal Takht and they take control. They take control, and Gyani Arur Singh formally apologizes for what he did. And that's when the Shromi Akali Dal is formed, right? The Shromi Akali Dal is the Sikh political party, a bit infamous currently. They're run by the Badal family. But at the time, they were the second oldest. They actually are the second oldest party in all of India, right? The second oldest, just after Congress. And they're the first party in all of India to run a state other than Congress, right? So Congress ran all of India except for Punjab. Shromi Akali Dal ran Punjab, and Shromi Akali Dal also hit the scene, right? Like, very strongly, right? They're doing all these protests. They gain control of the Akali Dal. They are this force to be reckoned with, and their leaders at the time are quite strong, right? And so they have control. The Sikhs have control. Britain also put up this I don't know exactly when it was taken down, but they put up this big watchtower within the Parakrama of the Harmandir Sahib. Did you know of that?
No, I didn't.
We can throw up a picture, but they built this like Gothic watchtower right in the complex of Harmandir Sahib.
To
right?
bring their like British architecture influence.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. And
is it still up or
no, it's been taken down a long time ago. But you can find old pictures, of Harmandir Sahib in the backdrop is this, huge Gothic.
A clock tower that's completely
out
of
of place. Yeah, it looks so out of place, but it's also kind of like the British imposing, hey, this is ours now.
Oh, we were here. Their version of a flag.
And, the fact that it's taken down, also represents that, we took it down. So then after that, you also have kind of entering, so the Shromi Akali Dal, that's like the 1920s. Fast forward, post-independence, we're at the Punjabi Suba movement, we talked about in episode 4. And a lot of that is derived at the Akal Takht, right? And they're saying these slogans. The Akal Takht Jathedar is arrested. The army of India comes into the Akal Takht to arrest these outspoken leaders, right? So that's a pretty prominent thing that happens at the Akal Takht during that time. And then also in the 70s, so about 10 years later, Indira Gandhi, before all the 80s stuff, she did a state of emergency. And a lot of the agitations against her and a lot of the agitations prior to all of the, the Khad coups and 84 and Pindran and all of that, 10 years prior to that, 1975, the majority of the agitations against Indira Gandhi and her, rule of decree, her state of emergency, starts at the Akal Takht. And And that's a pretty big point. And then a couple years later, and then this is kind of getting into the 80s, Punjab in the 80s. On Vaisakhi in 1978, some Sikhs from the Akhand Kirtani Jatha and the Damdami Taksal, under the leadership of Bhai Fauja Singh, they decide to protest outside of a Nirankari congregation. So the Nirankari is kind of like this, I don't want to get into exactly what they believe in, but they are a sect of Sikhi that these two other groups, the Akhand Kirtani Jatha and the Taksal, found the Nirankaris' practices to be disrespectful, and they found their rhetoric to be disrespectful, and they decide to protest. And the Nirankari congregation decides to attack these protesters. 13 of the protesters are killed. So that is a really big point in Sikh history, especially when it comes to the 80s. Because the Akal Takht released a hukamnama condemning the attack and also telling Sikhs to avoid and not be associated with the Nirankari sect. And that hukamnama is still binding till this day. Like the Akal Takht till this day has formally told us Sikhs to not associate with Nirankaris. So that was a pretty big point where the Akal Takht's authority was used. And then you have the 80s, right? In the 80s, you have the Anandpur Sahib resolution. It was actually the Shromi Akali Dal, Badal's party at the time, that wrote this Anandpur resolution, talking about a lot of things, water rights, language rights, Sikh rights, and they were hoping that India would accept it. And that's when you have Jarnail Singh Pindranle kind of rise to fame. He's already a pretty popular big figure, but he kind of enters the political field when he sponsors that resolution. And through the Dharm Yodh Morcha, they decide that, hey, we want India to accept this. And that's kind of the start of all the stuff that happened in the 80s. And then Pindranle and them, him and his followers, they move into the Darbar Sahib complex, the Harmandir Sahib complex, and then a year later or so, they move into the actual Akal Takht itself. So, Pindranle, of course, is there when, the Indian government, decides to do Operation Blue Star. So Operation Blue Star was when Indira Gandhi's army came into the Harmandir Sahib complex and, were after, the Kharkus, as they called them, terrorists, and they pretty much destroyed the Akal Takht. Very famous, very sad photos of the Akal Takht. But from our perspective, Jarnail Singh Pindranle was not the Jathedar of the Akal Takht, nor did he claim to be, right? But the fact that he was there did add, it was a way for him to kind of establish legitimacy and, help him garner support, and his own charismatic speeches. It was kind of like he was using the traditional authority of the Akal Takht without ever formally, being appointed anything, right? So, and then another really big point is, I guess now we're kind of into the modern times. So a question I have for you is, how do they appoint the Jathedars of the Akal Takht?
I would imagine, is it a voting system?
Yeah, I actually don't know the answer. I mean, I'm doing this podcast on the Akal Takht, and it's not that I don't know the answer because I was too lazy. I think I've exhausted all my options in trying to look into this. I literally on Twitter DM'd Jathedar Harpreet Singh, the executive Jathedar of the Akal Takht currently has a Twitter account, and I DM'd him asking, how are you guys appointed? And even in Garbir Singh's article, I believe he states that, it is, even he doesn't understand exactly how they're appointed, but it is under the, it is understood that it's pretty much Badal and the Shromi Akali Dal which appoints them.
I see.
So it's kind of like this dilemma where the Shromi Akali Dal and the SGPC, the Shromi Gurdwara Pranabh Committee, are these Sikh institutions that were created 100 years ago now, right? They were created in 1920, and they've kind of taken over some roles that the Akal Takht itself historically had. And there are, a lot of Sikhs that don't like that. Arguably myself included. It's like, who appoints the Jathedars of the Akal Takht? Well, we do know that Shomri Akali Dal and the SGPC are part of that process, right? But it's also like the Shomri Akali Dal is a political party under the influence of one family, right? And how can that family have so much power over these? And I'm kind of, and finally, up until this point has been, pretty factual. Now I'm kind of entering my own opinion. But if we look at the actual Akal Takht, as we're talking about Miri and Piri, we're talking about the way it was institutionally built, right? It's built at this angle. So when you look out, you always see the Harmandir Sahib, or from the Harmandir Sahib, you don't see the Akal Takht. The importance of that to me is like, it should not, and I'm not saying, I'm not giving you an answer, but I'm just giving you my opinion on, it should be the Sikh leaders, the religious leaders, that choose the political leaders. It should not be the political leaders that choose the religious leaders, right? Like, and that shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. I'm not saying that I think, in this day and age, religious leaders should be choosing political leaders. I'm just saying, from looking at the Akal Takht, looking at the Shromi Akali Dal Party, looking at the Shromi Gurdwara Pranabh Committee, the current three groups doesn't make too much sense to me. And I honestly, till this day, I really hope somebody listening to this podcast can tell me how the Jathedars of the Akal Takht are appointed. But one good thing is that the current Jathedar, Jathedar Harpreet Singh, he's pretty well respected across the board, and he doesn't really seem to be a political tool. He's been seen openly in pictures talking to other political leaders. Not something you really see, these guys under Badal doing. But there are, some Sikh groups that don't really look towards the Akal Takht on issues. Even here, living in Los Angeles, I don't think you and I, on a day-to-day basis, are influenced by anything the Akal Takht.
If at all.
Yeah, exactly. But Jathedar Harpreet Singh has made a lot of strides recently. He also recently said that within the next 3 years, I think he said this last month or the month before, he said within the next 3 years, we don't want any kirtan done by harmonium in the Harmandir Sahib. We want them, to use historical Sikh instruments, right? The harmonium was introduced by the Germans, right? And so that's interesting. Another, big thing is, why is it that I don't know how it is how they're appointed? Why is there so much, almost like mystery? Why isn't it, it's transparent? And another big thing is there are issues in our Panth that the Akal Takht hasn't weighed in on. Just on top of my head, what about like inter-religious weddings, like a Sikh marrying a non-Sikh? Can that happen at a Gurdwara? here in America and California, I'm sure you've been to some.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
And here it's common, but I don't know if you knew, and I've also heard this, I've never actually seen this, but I do believe that most Gurdwara in England do not allow you to marry a non-Sikh at the Gurdwara. And the reasoning being is, when you're doing the Lama, what's actually written there is, this is a wedding between two Sikhs. And that argument can be very easily, extrapolated and say, hey, half of these monne that we tie, I'm not no attack on monne, but half of these monne that we tie pugs on, are they really Sikhs? Why do you wear a pug only? So even that argument can be, taken a lot of ways. But the fact that the Akal Takht or any prominent Sikh institution hasn't weighed in on this is quite interesting. And there's also the dilemma, if they weigh in on it, is there going to be uphill on one side or the other? But it's interesting that the Gurdwaras, or a lot of the prominent Gurdwaras in Britain and England, I know, don't allow inter-Sikh weddings. They say if you're a Sikh and you want to marry a Christian, Muslim, atheist, whatever, go ahead and do that. You just can't do it in a Anand cottage, right? You can marry whoever you want, you just can't do it in a Nand cottage, right? And there's some other issues. The ones that come, quickest to my head are, like gay marriage. I'm not even sure that's an issue in the Panth, but it probably will be. I've yet to see two gay Sikhs wanting to get married, but also like that might be the reason, because can you get I don't even know the answer to that.
I'm not sure. I think I believe I did see Anand Karaj between two gay Sikh men.
Okay, I mean, so that's another big thing, right? Like these are questions I have, and I'm not sure there's an answer. So there's a lot that I believe the Akal Takht can still do. It is definitely an authority today, but it is, they almost purposely don't weigh in on a lot of issues. So that's been our episode on the history and significance of the Akal Takht. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, thank you to Garbir Singh. His article will be linked in our description. Everybody please check it out. It's very thorough. It's a scholarly, peer-reviewed article. And catch us in the next one, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, Herman.